Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Inforunners podcast. And today we are going to be continuing on one of the topics that we started when we were talking about fleet combat. We are going to be specifically, this case, talking about scouting as well as fleet communications, being as those are two very important topics. I'm Dazine was here.
And this is Hayes. Scouting in Star Citizen is going to be one of the most important roles in the actual game, at least from a military or staying safe sort of perspective. The information to find out what you're going to actually get into before you get in it, and to be able to share that information is going to be making and breaking any sort of missions that you do, or you could say more organized groups or convoys. And it's going to be ships like the Terrapin, which will end up being the mainstay sort of vessel for scouting with regards to combat operations, because at the end of the day, you cannot react to what you cannot see. How CIG implements this will be important, as this will make or break a game when it comes to how scouting and communications end up working in the end game. Things like fleet linkages of sensors and sort of formations, being able to see how groups move together as a group, and just general being able to relay sensor information to other ships other than the one you're just in, as well as people being able to counter those sensor and base scouting methods.
Yes, these are really important because you can't shoot what you can't see. And that information allows you a lot of room. And this does not just lead to your military classes. This really goes on to your convoys. Your trade people are going to need to have that information so they can stay safe. And even then, have that information to maybe even avoid natural disasters that are out there. So there's a lot of different reasons for good scouting. And the different types of communication that CIG implements would be very important. Like we were saying, it makes or breaks the game. Big one is really joint sensors, for one. Being able to say, I have a buddy 20 kilometers down there, I should be able to see what he sees over here, because we're in a group. In addition to that, the ability to call targets. How many people have that? You guys, how many people out there have tried teaming up an arena commander or in some of the different stages and gameplay out in the PU and tried to call targets when there's 10 people out there in a dogfight and you're trying to pick out one guy? There needs to be a way to have your team leader, squad leader, be able to call a target and everyone be able to focus on it. Also,
we're not just about calling targets, but actually having systems in game where you can select a target and everyone else can see that you have designated that target as something, a point of interest, so you can all instantly sort of link in and sort of go that. And that sort of thing also works for turrets. I mean, that's incredibly important to be able to call targets on a set of turrets over your entire ship as opposed to random fire.
Yes, but those systems need to be in game because you can't rely on just shot calling. Because, yes, you can say, well, that's a skill-based thing. It's like, what's the skill? Flipping through my 50 different enemies on my joystick while I'm trying to go, like, where are you? Where are you? I mean, that's not efficient. Also, in some games, have actually extended this to being able to find your fleet positions. And I really think that'd be a cool idea to implement into this particular game. Having your CNC ship be able to pull up, all right, well, I want this ship kind of in this area in space, and then you can fly there, and you can actually have fleet formations based off of that. And of course, the big fleet linkages are your jump linkages, being able to link your entire fleet together to go into quantum or go through wormholes, being able to keep that type of formation going and know the status of everything going on. All that information should be relayed to the relevant personnel or relevant ships, and that's what would make command ships really useful, because that way you don't have to rely on someone saying something. You have data out there so you can keep the comms fairly clean. And we'll be talking about comms a little bit later, because keeping comms clean is probably one of my biggest pet peeves in any sort of operation.
So in order for proper scouting in the game, you must incorporate proper sensor technologies into the gameplay. As of now, we have 3 different sort of sensor types. We have electromagnetic, we have infrared, and cross-sectional, which is like a radar approach. And hopefully they're going to have like a skill-based approach to this. So instead of having like a little mini game that you play and it then gives you the correct answer, it's going to be like, well, proper signal analysis where different signals will be fairly recognizable for either different sorts of ships. Like a cross-sectional signature would only come to a particular ship hull, whilst an electromagnetic sort of signal would depend on the components within a ship. And so perhaps someone who's spent enough time to remember these sort of different signals will end up being able to identify what he's actually looking at.
Yes, and this really adds a new layer into Star Citizen. Instead of just the computer telling you, well, that's a retaliator out there, this type of information will allow skilled operators to go through and be able to go, oh, I know what that blip is based on this EM signature and this here, and you'll have people that'll be able to read that. And that could also allow different layers into the game of your scouting, being as you can have your long range sensors in which you kind of just have the signatures, and it takes skill to figure that out. Then the closer and closer you get more and more information hand fed to you, basically, because your sensors are able to deduce this on their own better and better. And even then, think about loadouts. This could be a really cool way of balancing loadouts too, being as you can have some loadouts which are really good at just saying, that is this, but you have shorter range versus long range loadouts in which you're like, okay. So, enough beating that topic with a dead horse. You also have the idea of how good sensors are into ranges. And right now, it's really not a good idea to be thinking about how sensors work in game, because sensors are going to have ridiculous ranges, being as, first of all, we're in space, and space is big. But the other thing is, think about modern satellites. So if you think Google Earth right now, you have a satellite orbiting above us, and we're not talking a small distance, we're actually talking a fairly large distance, and it can go in there and it can see a pretty good resolution, and that's a civilian satellite. And now think about spaceships in the future. They need to have the ability to have that type of range, even if it's not so pinpoint and more role specific, like your fighters have more of a combat oriented sensors, and in your exploration are looking for different things. These sensors will have different overlaps, different ranges, and different capabilities, which could lend to a whole host of other skills needed to be able to read or diagnose what's going on with different sensors.
Well, I like the Google Earth analogy because, you know, I can get up on Google Earth and I can literally see, hey, that's my house. Shit, it even has the car there. And, you know, that's the sort of level of accuracy Star Citizen is aiming for. If you look back at that Constellation commercial, they were looking up and say, oh, look, this planet has breathable atmosphere in such and such conditions. And, you know, they haven't even landed yet. This is the sort of information we're expecting to be able to take out from orbit. You might not be able to see things, you know, that are on the other side of the planet, but the ranges involved in this are going to be huge.
Well, and the thing is, right now, fighter range is pretty bad, and I would actually have to say, I think the fighter range, just based off of that like Google Earth example, needs to be buffed just a little bit. But again, well, sensor linkages.
In my experience, we've gone out and hunted people in the PU, and like we were in about 3 fighters, and we just had a Cutlass with us. He managed to escape us, but the Cutlass still had the range to sort of detect him. So they do have different ships having different scanner ranges already implemented in the game. They just don't really have the sort of the gameplay and the system mechanics in for us to take advantage of this. And that's it. It comes down to you're going to have ships that are going to go out and sort of chase something down, and other ships that are going to point the way, because those ships may be in the dark until they actually get, you know, pretty much right on top of what they're actually trying to track down.
Well, and of course, you're going to need the next layer of scouting, which are going to be ships that can be able to detect quantum jumps. Basically, hey, something's quantum jumping toward us, and also wormholes. You're going to need that type of detection to be able to figure out, well, what's going on. not just sensors nearby, but you're going to have that next level sensor saying there's something or a bunch of somethings coming this way.
Well, with the quantum, you're going to have like early warning detection. I mean, did you see the ATV they did just recently where the vandal were coming in and they were giving a warning like 30 seconds before it even jumped in? That's the sort of thing you need to, one, sort of know. You need to be able to scan far enough ahead that, one, you know what you're getting into, and secondly, whoever you're approaching also knows that you're getting close to there, even though you're on quantum. So there's going to be a whole sort of a quantum scanning mechanic as well. And quantum-based sort of navigation should eventually end up tying into the star map. So I wonder how they're going to link in things like star map and sensory-based stuff, because at the end of the day, if you're going to say, well, I can pick up a signal and it's here, that has to have linked into the star map for you in order to figure out relative to where that signal is coming in the direction. So we're eventually going to see these advanced sensor sort of systems tied directly into the star map.
Well, now that we've talked about the different types of things scouting is going to have to incorporate, let's talk about the actual act of scouting. And outside of covert ops, scouting is going to really consist of two different things. Your convoy and military actions, and even then they're going to have the two different types of scouts. You're going to have your forward scouts, and then you're going to have your actual having a censorship with your fleet. Your forward scouts are going to give you extra range. They're going to help extend that and allow you to see more farther out sooner and allow you to react to the situation. While having a censorship with your fleet is going to allow you to go, oh, well, there's jamming going on, so at least we're not completely dead in the water, as well as thinking about scouting in the way of your large ships are to have better sensors. They're going to be able to detect things, but your smaller ships, i.e. your forward scouts, are going to be able to take that and then go in and help narrow down what it is.
Well, it's very much the idea that the forward scout's probably going to be more things like the terrapin that can go in, and therefore if you take a loss with the terrapin, it's not such a big deal. And people will still relay that information even if they can't in-game. I think CSG need to realize that, people are going to maybe not use Spectrum completely, but we'll get to that a bit later. And then the Carrack obviously would be better for a more local area-based scanning. I mean, at the end of the day, you still need local scanning along with your forward scout, because if someone's ambushing you in stealth, you need to see them as soon as they get close enough, and you need to detect those torpedoes as soon as they're launched. So you still need local-based scanning for your main protection force, but you also need the forward scouting so you can get an idea of what you're getting into before you get into it.
Well, the nice thing about forward scouts is that not only do they help extend your range and help you avoid ambushes by pirates and other baddies out there, you have the ability also for your forward scouts to hopefully trip the ambush before the rest of your fleet hits it. So, sorry, I just lost my terrapin, but you know what? The rest of the fleet's good.
And I know you may be asking, what about the Hornet Tracker and the Aquila? I mean, the Aquila's got that sensory turret up the top there. And you say, well, they could be scouting vessels. And look, I have no doubt the Aquila is going to be a decent scouting vessel. It's got a good size. It's probably good. But, both of these ships are not built around the idea of scouting. You look at the Hornet Tracker, it's a one-seat sort of with a radar dish on it. It would be used for target support in a squadron or a group, but it lacks that second man seat. It doesn't have a proper SRAX capability, and its sensors are probably on the lower end of things.
Well, let's be honest here. These ships are modular. We're not going to have a Hornet Tracker. We're going to have a Super Hornet and toss the tracker dish on it. Just be completely fair here, especially when they actually allow that second seat to do more than just be a turret. And the Aquila, why wouldn't I just take that nice, beautiful tracker dish on there and plop it onto a Phoenix or Andromeda? Seriously.
You probably will, but I mean, at the end of the day, they're probably going to be focusing more on those more specialized roles. I mean, what the most important thing with scouting is probably the stronger the sensor, the larger the visual range, that bubble that you can detect things in. And that's really what's going to make or break an ability to detect someone who's coming in to attack you before they get close enough to start, before it's too late. And at the end of the day, these ships are not going to be the best choices.
Yeah, so currently we're both predicting the Terrapin and the Carrack are going to be your mainstays. And again, back to the Carrack, I just have to brag on that ship. Not only does it have great sensors, but it also has decent force projection with how its turret layouts are. And the fact that it also has a small snub fighter. And this snub fighter has sensors, which means you have another way of even extending your range, especially if you're wanting to go through a wormhole that may be unstable. So this leads to a whole nother level of scouting, because if you're going through wormholes, you're probably going to want to send a scout through, not just to find out what's on the other side, but to help map it if it's an unstable situation. Because again, we don't know exactly how wormholes are going to be fully working.
Poor Merlin, he's been a suicide door knocker. I can't believe you. Anyway, well, it'll be particularly, I like the idea of the Herald. The Herald is a decent medium range. It's got some scanners. It's going to be very good at focusing on a long sort of distance and an arc. Its primary purpose is probably not the detection of ships, but it is definitely going to be for like picking up transmissions, picking up sort of data.
Covert ops.
And covert ops. This is essentially starting it into e-warfare. The idea of taking other people's information and making your own, and probably transferring communications securely.
Yes, and just going on to the idea of, before we even go really into e-warfare, you need to think about scouting, as in you have your scouting is, like we said, you have your general scouting, like your combat scouting, but then you have your kind of covert op style, which is you're going to have your Inforunners out there, you're going to have your occasional lone Terrapin sitting out somewhere looking, and please don't forget the Endeavor with that giant telescope right there.
When you think about it, the Endeavor is a giant version of the Herald. It's got a bigger damn scope on it to pick up signals from longer and less powerful signals, from a greater distance. But it's also got all those computer cores to sort of crack the codes and send encoded transmissions. I mean, at the end of the day, if you properly set up a Endeavor, you could do a very strong sort of information transmission and perhaps even jamming. In which you may end up seeing the Endeavor taking as a support role.
Well, the jamming is nice, but that is not nearly as nice as the ability to pull the other information. You might be like, well, what information is going to be there if they're not using Spectrum? Think about what we just said. Oh, well, you link your entire team sensors. Great. Well, I now know everything your team knows. And that just makes things 10 times nicer. But again, this goes to scouting being your preemptive, because you have to have this early scouting before you do any op.
They can stop people from they can't stop people from using other things on Spectrum, right? So they can't necessarily home in on communications if people use other clients, but you can still hack into a shared sensory input from an entire fleet. So in other words, you hack their fleet, you know the position of all their ships, and you know where they are and what they're doing. And that's probably more important information than what they're saying off on their TeamSpeak somewhere that you can't get access to.
Well, now let's start sitting around and talking about e-warfare, because we talked about, all right, so you have your forward scouts, you have your scouts in your fleet, you have your pre-scouting operations. Now, well, how do you counter that? Well, that's e-warfare, and e-warfare encompasses a ton of different things, everything from jamming, and jamming is a huge subject of its own. And then, of course, you have stealth, sensor dampening, EMPs, and of course fake signatures, because there's nothing better than having dummies out there making your enemy think that you're 10 times stronger than you are when they're trying to scout you from a distance.
Well, dummies can also fill things like torpedoes and missiles as well, making they may think they've got a lock, but then it goes off and hits the wrong target, or target that doesn't exist. There's a lot of things you can do with that. And, you know, jamming can take effect from more things. It can affect one ship to be able to communicate its sensory data from one to the other. It can do things like affect the lock time that it takes to lock on torpedoes onto large capitals or other ships, or missile locks in general. It could make automated turrets have a particularly hard time tracking targets. There's a lot of different sort of things that e-warfare can encompass. And so it should be more than the idea of hacking into someone's communications. At the end of the day, hacking into someone's comm setup is actually probably the least useful information you could get.
Well, again, electronic warfare is really going to be the pinnacle of warfare, in my personal opinion, because it's not the glamorous I'm dogfighting, but it's going to allow your fleet to win the day. The Sentinel is going to be amazing, the Vanguard Sentinel, because it's going to allow people with all of its different things. It's not just the EMP shutting down the ships, but if you have something to jam, as I said, again, jam missiles, make targeting ridiculously hard, or even make it so you can't see what your called target is, you're going to make the battle that much faster to win, because battles are going to be done like this. And if you can't target something quick, it's over.
The Sentinel is our only dedicated e-war platform to date. I mean, unless you include things like the Herald type mechanics, which is more about information sort of control, maybe sensor and sort of controls and things like that. We really need some more e-war based ships to sort of expand on these roles.
Well, you kind of have the Warlock.
EMP disable, I guess. Yeah, I suppose a little bit, but I think that was their first sort of stab at what EMP might be. And then we get into things like actual communication platforms. I mean, at the moment we have Spectrum, and CIG are trying to develop Spectrum they're trying to make it by everything. They're trying to make it to replace Discord. They're making it into a Reddit. They're doing it into a forums. They want to replace TeamSpeak. To be honest, I think they're biting off more than they can chew. I think they should be able to make the large majority of people happy a lot of the time, but when it comes to more organized sort of group play, it's never going to cut the mustard. If you get into sort of larger organized groups, as I've been in guilds and orgs in the past, let's say a minimum of 100 to 400 people operations, which would normally consist of 4 to 5 different groups. Let's say somewhere between 50 to 75 per group, you start needing more dedicated communication platforms such as TeamSpeak and Ventrilo. Because what you end up having is sort of a tier of different levels of communication, and is normally divided into, you have, let's say, several different orgs or guilds. Let's say we have 5, and then each guild is broken into separate parties. And then they'll have separate leaders, which then sort of designate roles and priorities within those parties. And then they'll have an overall leader, which will then talk to the team leaders. But then those overall leaders will then be in another channel with every single other leader of the 5 other orgs. And so you end up getting not only the org group channels, you end up getting a leader channel where they talk and sort of listen into the leader channel, but they don't talk in the leader channel. And then you have the top leader of the orgs all together in a channel that's sort of more private, where they actually talk sort of tactics and the overall thing. And then even above that, they might have 1 or 2 people who decide the general direction. Because at the end of the day, if you have 5 cooks cooking a soup, it doesn't normally turn out right. It's a bit of a mess.
But the thing is, you're going to have that multiple level comm system, and groups, even if you make Spectrum be able to do that easier than all the others, they're not going to do it if you have the ability in game to have communications disrupted, because secrecy is going to be key here. With any sort of big org group op, secrecy is big, and I hate to say Eve, spies. Just saying. You have to...
There's not many games that have got it right. I think PlanetSide 2 has a good stab at communications, which a lot of people find acceptable, with the idea of having multi-tiered channels and sort of groups. But at the end of the day, it's things like TeamSpeak that allow you to be logged into multiple clients and be in multiple channels at the same time, and then talking to different channels using keybinds whilst not hopping around. You need that sort of a sophisticated communication structure to make large groups of hundreds of people being able to work together. Because if you put 500 people or even just like 200 people all in the same channel, the only way that's going to work is if you mute everyone except for maybe 3 or 4 leaders. And that it comes down to comms discipline. There is no comms discipline. And so by breaking it out into smaller parts, you can greatly and effectively sort of utilize that large number group of people. And unfortunately, I think CIG don't have any experience in running these sorts of groups.
Well, I would disagree. I think they have plenty of experience with it, but the thing is, you want to create a system, and I guarantee you they could probably create a system that works just as good, but the biggest issue is called security right there. Because, again,
people will want their private servers. I mean, like... Yeah. And this happens. I mean, like, if you think there's a counter e-warfare in the game, there's also out of the game. I've had plenty of times where org and alliance servers have been DOSed, and the servers have gone down, and then you brought the backup ones online, or people have compromised the server through brute force or hacking, and then sort of immediately changed the passwords and kicked everyone off the server.
People think that's extreme, but sadly, that happens.
It happens. I've seen it time and time again. And so then you have dedicated server admins who are constantly trying to stay up with the latest versions and making sure the passwords are secure, making sure that no one should have access privileges that they shouldn't have. But I mean, spies and actual real internet espionage is a thing. Especially if you're looking at huge stakes, and I don't know how huge of stakes this game is going to be, because true large PvP is probably going to be very minimal. But I guarantee you, when it does happen, even though it's minimal, it's going to be for something big, because you don't get that many people together and organize it just to, earn a few credits. Just saying. Either way, this is actually where I hate to say Discord fails. I'm just having to say, Discord's a great service, but it does fail to meet that need as well. Discord is a great social media platform, and it's great for groups to always be online, check on their phone, and have a good, yarn and keep up to date with each other. As soon as you start getting into needing a group of, even 50 people, there's too many people all wanting to talk at the same time. Unless you enforce very severe comms discipline, Discord is not the way to go. Well, comms discipline is one of my pet peeves. You should be able to have a group like that has good comms discipline. And even when you have your groups, like he was talking about, divided down from your leaders to your sub-leaders and all that, the chatter should be to a minimum and relevant. And that's a thing that a lot of people fail at when they do these operations. I think if you sit down and you talk to a group and explain what comms discipline is and why it's important, and then point out in the past, well, we did this here and we screwed ourselves because we didn't have good comms discipline and no one could listen to what was happening, people start to get that. But you're right, it's something that it's a skill that's taught and learned. And it's not even just discipline. But the thing is, it's not just discipline of not talking or only speaking relevant information. It's what information is relevant and how to say it in such a manner that you are speaking with the fewest words possible, but staying as clear as possible. Short, brief, and relevant. So guys, what do you think? Are we completely wrong about scouting? Are we right? What would you like to actually see in the game? I mean, let us know. Put the comments down in the box below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, see you around.